Hello.
Hey, Chad.
You say something in the movie that really struck me, that for me, I felt like could be this whole interview. Just one question. You say, the purpose of death is the release of love. I saw so many dimensions to that statement. What did you mean by that?
Well, this is a movie really about stories and how we tell stories about things, ourselves, other people, where they come from, what they're used for. And so, one of the stories is that, when someone dies, you're supposed to feel grief. And it's not just a story, it's a real emotion, It's a real thing. I mean, you feel sad. So I have a teacher named Mingyur Rinpoche, and he's a Tibetan guy. And he really understands a lot of things. In the middle of the movie, there's a little thing that he says to practice. It's one sentence thing, and he says, you really should practice how to feel sad without being sad. And that's pretty difficult to do, really, because there's lots of sad things in the world, but so you can't really push them away. If you try to push them away, you're kind of fooling yourself, really. And
It's
they'll come
important
and
to
get you.
feel it.
Yeah, but don't become it. Don't become it. I mean, who wants to drag around just like whining and sad? That's not a good thing. That's not good at all.
That's a brilliant insight.
Yeah, he's amazing, and he's a teacher who is he's technically the happiest man in the world.
What do you mean?
Well, University of Wisconsin Neuroscience Department had decided we're going to find the happiest guy in the world. It turns out to be this guy. And the way they do that is through sound. They play him a lot of stuff that's like would make a lot of people just lose their minds and just cry, and I don't want to make it sound like he's like strong and cold. He's like really resilient. So it didn't drive him crazy, So it was. So anyway, the other part about that is that teaching how to feel sad without being sad is also don't just sit there and whine. You do something. If you see something like that, And what I did was make a film. That was my kind of response to that. And it's another reason it sort of features a dog, because empathy is something that, I don't know, dogs really have. They really are able to look at people, study them, see what's making them tick, and that's what I like to do too. That's what I'm looking at is who are you? And then you hear the person's story, and it's something about who they are, but we just have these for convenience, these stories.
And you've always been like that? You study people on that level.
I'm a spy. Because what kind of spy would say, I'm a spy? A really stupid spy, So I don't know. I just like looking at, trying to see what makes people tick. And also I like that dogs really like us. They like people. They actually kind of admire us. One of the big reasons they admire us is we invented cars. They love that, stick their head out the window, whoosh, the breeze is running through their ears, and, speed. That's a cool thing. So anyway, I tried to make a film about things that were very sad, but with a lot of joy.
And that's why, is that also part of why you chose the dog as the lens? I mean, it's a bit of a curious choice.
Yeah. Well, this is an animal that I really like, and I thought it would be really interesting to see certain things through the dog's eyes. So you're asked to do a lot of things in this movie, which is actually in a certain way more like a radio play, because it's constant talking and in some images, but they don't give you a huge amount of information. So there's one very long sequence with just telephone poles and telephone lines, and you hear this long story about a guy who lived up in the trees. And so you just have to imagine who that might be, and what he looks like, and, fill in the whole. So it's a very collaborative thing. The way radio is, you have to like picture it yourself. And so so you're asked to look through. It's not like watching a hero go through the motions of something, or you're asked to see things in a lot of different ways, through a dog's eye, through the lens of a surveillance camera, floating about in the bardo, the Tibetan afterlife. You're swinging all over the place.
Mm-hmm. So you have to engage your imagination in
Yes.
different emotions.
Yeah.
I want to stay with Lola Bell for a moment. Tell us about Lola Bell. She plays piano. She recorded a Christmas album.
She did, which was, it wasn't the best Christmas album
That
you've
made me
ever
laugh
heard.
in the film. It was you saying, it wasn't so great.
Well, it was pretty good. It was pretty, let's say, it was the standards. Now, the reason she was doing that was she went blind. She had cancer and went blind. And a lot of dogs go blind, and it's no big deal. They've got great sense of smell. They've got great hearing, much better than ours. And they're okay if they go blind. Mm-hmm. She was not. She froze. She was really identifying with people, kind of needed to, like, she was a needed to see and be seen dog. Like, hey, how you doing? It's kind of like super friendly, West Village dog, and very socially
used to
engaged.
people,
yeah, loved people, and didn't love dogs at all. Really, kind of like dissed them all the time. Just like, do I know you? I don't think so. So she went blind, and we couldn't even. She wouldn't move from her spot. We had to pick her up to take her out for a so-called walk. And so I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? So I found a trainer. The trainer said, hey, I taught my dogs to play the piano. I was like, yeah? What do you mean? I said, okay, that might be good. So she taught Lola Bell to play piano, which means, we just had a bunch of keyboards on the floor. She would run over, turn them on, and play. She played a bunch to, the just regular grooves that are in there. She had rang a bell, barked, did castanets, and it was kind of like music was her whole world. Music saved her life, and music saved my life too. So I know what it's like. You get this kind of way of making it, and you live inside music. So, and that's what she did. So she found a place and things she could do where she was in control, and she loved experimenting with sounds. It was just because she had really amazing hearing, and also, she was the reason I did also a concert for dogs at one point as well. I did.
Yeah, so she became part of your artistic process. And
yeah, she did.
Work. Yeah,
she was a collaborator of a sort. Yeah.
Have you always had the sense that your perspective on life was a little bit different? You talk about your childhood in this film and where you'd go in your imagination.
Yeah, I never was about comparing myself with other. I didn't have an idea that I was different. I mean, I was part of a crowd. I was, there were 8 kids in my family. So when there are that many people, you get just sort of lost. Nobody pays any attention to you. So you make up your own thing, your own world, and you just do it,
Well, you talk about making a fake colonial era newspaper when you're a kid.
Oh, yeah, that was one of my hobbies, yeah.
I mean, that's different.
Well, didn't you do that in school? Didn't you have to, copy that colonial writing at any point?
I didn't have to do that.
Oh, you didn't have to do that?
No.
I don't know. In Chicago suburbs, we had to do that. Here's how in the old colonial times, they would put out their newsletters, and so-and-so's cow was branded. So I thought that'd be fun to just copy that style. And so I used to make copies and hand them out to neighbors. Nobody wanted them, of course.
It's not the
this?
most important news of the
This
day.
is out of date, I'll tell you, by about 400 years.
You're listening to Q. I'm speaking with artist Laurie Anderson, whose new movie, Heart of a Dog, is playing this week at the Toronto International Film Festival. So Lola Bell passed away a few years ago. Why did that loss hit you so hard?
I guess dogs have this innocence and purity as well as, sense of fun and empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's not that it's simple. It's complex, but it's a real. I had a real bond with her, and I think when you have a bond with an animal, it's can be very, very pure, and it can just represent a kind of pure love that sometimes people aspire to have, but don't. Now, I have to say, I like people better than animals. Just so that's clear.
Make that
okay,
clear,
I
sure.
want to make that super clear. That animals should have rights and so on and blah blah blah. But we rule here on this planet. So, but Lola Bell taught me a lot of things. She taught me how to be old too. She would just kind of like slow down a little bit, and it was really like lovely. She was a lovely, lovely creature. So when she died, I really tried to experience it, and also because, vets are it's such a taboo to talk about that kind of stuff. They kind of go, she's not going to do that well, and you don't want her to be in pain. And so what we could do is we could just give her a little shot, and we could give her, then she'd fall asleep in a light sleep. We could give her another little shot, and then she'd deeper sleep in another shot, and she'd, and so, it's kind of the American approach to death for people too.
Yeah.
Don't feel anything. Make sure you don't feel anything. Knock you over the head with a brick while you're not looking, so that you don't even experience your own death.
We have this fear.
Yeah. And, it's a fear of a lot of things. First of all, just pain, and a lot of people just, can't face it. And also, we don't really know what's going to happen. I mean, a few people sort of say they do, but,
Yeah.
nobody really has any idea what happens. Now, the Tibetans have this book, and the book is right in the middle of the movie. It's called The Tibetan Book of the Dead, and it's an amazing book about energy, what happens to in their idea of what happens to you when you die. And so what they believe is that once all the senses are shutting down, like your eyes go dark, your heart stops, brain flatlines, the hammers in the ears are still working. That's the last sense to go. So they use that portal to give you instructions. So so it's also, the subtitle of this book is called The Great Liberation Through Hearing. So since this is radio, people really appreciate that, that it's like comes through so much of what you learn, what you know comes through your ears. And so they yell instructions from the Tibetan Book of the Dead into the dying person's ear. And they yell, "You're dead! You're dead now!" Because it's very confusing, supposedly. And look for 2 lights, and don't go to the close one, go to the far one. And then they analyze this whole shift of energy. And to me, it makes a lot of sense, as much sense as other ideas about what happens to us in terms of laws of physics as well. It doesn't really disappear, this energy. It goes somewhere. So where does it go? How does it happen? So it just is a description over this period of time of this energy turning into some other life form, because this is energy that's alive. This is not lightning. This is something that has life and consciousness. So it's a description of what happens to that consciousness.
The release of the love.
Yeah. Energy into love.
Death
into love.
You talked about what you learned from Lola Bell passing away. You also lost your husband, Lou Reed, about 2 years after you lost Lola Bell. Towering figure in rock with the Velvet Underground, as well as his solo work. You touch on your relationship with him in the film. What did you learn in those final months with him?
Well, he's a spiritual guide in the film, and the movie is dedicated to him. But it's not really about him. It's about as I said, about how we, and it's not about me either. It's not a getting to know you film at all. It's about you. It's about it's about stories. It's about how it, those kinds of, how we forget the stories and how they get plastered onto us, and kind of who we are, and how to figure out what we're doing here. So Lou gets the last song in the movie, a beautiful song called Turning Time Around. That's what love is. And so it's about, in a way, looking at time in a different way, not kind of going back and being nostalgic and, oh, those are the great days, if I could just get back there, or in the future, I'm going to figure this out, it'll all be so much better. It's about just accepting and really liking and really living in the present as intensely as you can, and without shifting into all of these other time zones all the time. Now, the film does that. It shifts back into my childhood, goes, and
Because how else are we supposed to understand our lives, right?
Yeah. It does sometimes help. And one of the things was actually through film that it worked, because I was in the middle of making this film, and one of my brothers called me and said, hey, I have all these boxes of film from our childhood. Would you just transfer them? And I was like, I'm kind of busy. I don't know. I mean, but okay. So I transferred a couple of these old 8mm films, and I was like, it was amazing. Suddenly, so all of this stuff that I'd kind of forgotten about, and suddenly there was this lake where we used to live next to a lake, and there was an island, and my little brothers in their stroller, and my mother pushing the stroller. And I remembered this time when I had been pushing their stroller, and that the ice had broken, and they had fallen through the ice. And I called them up, and I said, guys, you can't believe what I just found. I found the lake. I found you guys in the stroller. Remember the time I almost killed you? And they said, yes, we do remember that. What, are you going to put that on the movie? I said, well, I don't know. Would you mind if? And they said, yeah, okay. So, anyway, it was a story really about not so much the thing that happened, but other people's reaction to it. In other words, I came back home as an 8-year-old kid, carrying my 2-year-old twin brothers, screaming. I'd almost drowned them. They'd fallen into the lake, and their stroller had sunk to the bottom, and they were strapped in. So I had to dive down and get them. It was really scary. I'd lost the stroller. I was like, oh, Mom's going to kill me. This is like awful. So I ran back to these two screaming 2-year-olds, and I put him down and told my mother the story. And she did not, there was no mention that I almost drowned my brothers. She just said, what a great swimmer you are. And I didn't know you could be such a good diver. I didn't know you knew how to dive. So that was the first time someone had given me that kind of thing.
That kind of praise? Yeah,
that I'm seen as a hero. Not as someone who just almost drowned her brothers, which she could have said. So this for me suddenly became a sort of way to end this film, because a lot of it was about her as well, my mother.
Yeah.
And in fact, and also how stories about your past get they're sort of really inadequate. The second story in the film is about her and a speech she made on her deathbed.
Yeah.
So she was a very proud woman. She was very cool, and she waited till all her 8 kids are there to give her speech, and it's almost like, there's a microphone there almost, and she stands up and goes, "Thank you all for coming here, and it's been a pleasure." And she's making a speech, and we're all like, "Whoa!" And then she gets a little lost, and she starts talking to the animals up on the ceiling that she sees up there, and she's a great horsewoman, loved horses, and so she's like, then she's back to the microphone, and thank you all for talking to history, talking to the family, saying goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
But the language, the words are all getting jumbled and shredded and breaking apart. And you realize, wow, it's so hard to put words into and make words about what really happens to us, not what really, really happens to us in life.
That's interesting, kind of questioning the adequacy of stories.
Exactly.
At the same time, I feel like the only thing we have to understand our life is stories and understand the world as stories. Stories and images. You could maybe separate
And what about music?
the two. Yeah, and you have music.
Yeah, you
I
have
think you have
music.
stories, you have images, and you have music. That's
Yeah.
nothing else.
Yeah.
And they're insufficient,
Yeah.
but they're kind of all we have, and you use all of them.
Yeah. And that's
this
what
film.
film is.
And it's interesting where the different images come from as well. I mean, some of them come from the vault. Some of them are, close to your mind.
Right.
Do you have an image of the final months with your husband that stays with you?
Oh, well, the film isn't really about him.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But it's about all these people.
Well, I can tell you
lives.
one thing,
Yeah.
which is one of the things that we spend a lot of time with because, and it is it was very helpful for me to do this, and it's something that I thought a lot about and still do. And it was some rules that he and I made about how to live. Because living goes by, like things happen really fast. Sometimes like you don't, how should I react? You're in a complicated situation. Somebody says something to you and you're like, whoa, you don't really know right off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
So we made up these rules so that you could like have some things to fall back on really fast. So the first one is, and there's just rules to live by. Okay, so the first one is don't be afraid of anyone. If you can imagine living your life, you're not afraid of anyone. So that's number one. Number two is you get a really good bullshit detector and you learn how to use it. Just like, is that really happening or not? Third is to be really, really tender. And with those, you're covered. So, if things are happening too fast, you kind of go, okay, don't be afraid. Do not be afraid.
Yeah.
So those helped me a lot.
That's beautiful.
As
three simple rules.
Yeah. Kind of. I think it's nice to distill things sometimes. Sometimes when you distill a story, though, like this is, one of the points in this film is how you forget stuff if you repeat it too much. Like somebody says, "What kind of kid were you?" And you have this, you have one or two stories to haul out. I was a shy kid, or I was a punk, or I was a whatever. And it doesn't really say that much about it. It's sort of calling card, Mm-hmm. And probably a good thing, because if somebody says, "What kind of kid were you?" and you give them the long story, it's boring.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they don't. It's the same as like, how are you? People don't really want to know how you are in detail.
Mm-hmm.
So, but those stories, when they get repeated, they kind of
they lose their meaning.
They do.
Yeah.
And so a lot of this film is about sound and what and how that relates. So one of the stories in the middle of the film was called A Story About a Story, and it was about when I was a kid showing off and jumping off a high board into a pool. Mm-hmm. And I missed the pool, so I broke my back. And it's just this kind of, that's my kid story of being in the hospital, and the doctor said I wouldn't walk. And I thought, what an idiot. You remember how, like when you were 12, you thought adults were pathetic? Just idiots. You felt sorry for them. You never thought
that when you were 12?
Oh, yeah. Most of the people I knew were like, you're kind of embarrassed of your parents. And they were like, what are you? It's like, they just didn't know anything, and so.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, you didn't. It's like, I'm glad to know that you didn't have that experience. A lot of kids I know did. And so when this doctor said, you're not going to walk, I thought, yeah, this guy, wow, what does he know? And the volunteers coming reading these baby books. And I was 12 and I was reading Tale of Two Cities. I was not reading bunny stories. So anyway, that was my story about how. And then I wore a brace for a couple of years. That was also super humiliating from 12 to 14. Wear a giant metal brace. Oh, whoa. Frankenstein. And so once I was like right in the middle of telling this story, and I had like an audio hallucination. Like I was just like, for some reason, I don't know why.
You're outside of yourself suddenly.
Well, I heard the sound of the hospital. There was like, because I was describing it, and then I heard the sound of, because I was in the ward with all of these kids who'd been burned, and they were in these little rotisserie things that were turning them around to cool their burns, and suddenly I remembered what that sounded like at night, because it was all of these kids crying and screaming all night, and just this amazing sound that children make when they're dying. And I just I heard that just in the middle of telling this story, and I was like, back there, you can suddenly just like, whoa, it's not just a story, you're back there in that place, and it's really dark. And I realized, whoa, I am so afraid. And it's so, how come nobody's saying where these kids are going? They're carted off, you never see them again. So many kids died in there, and so it was through sound that I remember that. So I was just talking about how every time you tell a story from your past, each time you tell it, you forget it more. Right at that point in the film, after that story, there's just a long section of no sound. You're just looking at some woods where it's snowing, and so it's just quiet. So I'm trying to talk to the part of people that isn't talking, just your silent self, of the one who's looking out from your eyes and not talking, but in there, who lives in there. And
that's powerful. That's like you were suddenly struck by the actual fullness of that story, the actual truth of that story you've been telling so long. We only have time for one more question. I apologize. As an artist, you control what you're making, but we don't have control over death. Is art the opposite of death?
well, I'm not sure opposite. I would say the opposite of death would be life, but but being an artist is very godlike. It really is. You make something that wasn't there. It's the ultimate power trip. It wasn't there. You put it there. So, from that point of view, it's really very, very intense living. To just kind of invent something. So.
So not quite the opposite of death, but something life-giving.
Yeah, it's life-giving, but also, I pretty much see this as cycles, and I'm trying not to label things, because also, all of the things that are powerful about death are powerful about life, and so it's not like it's a negation. It's just part of it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. It's been fun.